Well, thank you, everyone. We've been having a great day so far. I just want to say thank you to the IHRB and to AIM Progress for hosting this forum. And today we're going to be focusing on the starting point. As you all know, we've been talking about migrant workers today. We've been talking about the ecosystem that exists or lack thereof and the need to create one. But one of the most important aspects when it comes to international recruitment, when it comes to migrant workforces, is where do workers come from? A lot of the times the recruitment industry remains in the shadows. We don't know how workers are able to arrive to the country of destination. And I'm really excited to join our panelists today to really dive and jump into what we're calling the starting point, supporting migrant workers, understanding the experience of recruitment. And in this session, we're going to be examining how to support migrant workers. What is being done? How do we create a journey of awareness, capacity building, strengthening recruitment policies? And we're going to be looking at practical solutions that have been implemented, hearing from worker representatives as well as organizations that have been combating these issues for a long time, and knowing that, just like William was saying, transformational change takes time. And how do we really start to bring into focus the folks that are impacted, right? Those are the migrant workers. How do we really start to put them in a position, in a place that they're heard, and we're able to gather that information and be able to influence not just policies, but models and the reality that exists for migration today. So I want to just thank everyone for attending today, and I want us to go ahead and get started. And I know that there's profiles online, so I'm going to jump a little bit on the introductions, and let's just go ahead and dive a little bit into folks. Do we have Maritza here with us?
Hey,
Maritza, can you hear us?
Good morning.
All right, good morning. So Maritza here is actually a worker representative who herself has migrated in the past. I'm really excited to be able to have her experience and voice here today. I think many of the times we have these forums, folks get together, and the one thing that's missing are the actual individuals that go through this experience. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Maritza. And Maritza, if you could do us the favor and share with us what is the reality of the recruitment experience for migrant workers? And if you could share with us, what is it that you know to be recruitment?
My name is Maritza, and I'm from Veracruz, Mexico. I had my H-2A visa in 2018, and I went to work to Alabama. I worked in the field on the crops of I forgot the name right now, I'm sorry, cucumber and also pumpkins. On March of 2021, I filed a complaint under the Free Trade Agreement on Chapter 23 on the basis of discrimination because of gender.
Pues fue cuando decidí irme a trabajar a los Estados Unidos en el año del 2016, ya que en mi país sí hay trabajo, pero con salarios mal remunerados.
Well, my experience, I decided to migrate to the United States in 2016 because I wanted to find a better remunerated work.
Esperaba que me fuera muy bien. Tuve el sueño americano de construir una mejor calidad de vida, aunque sabía que sería un trabajo 10 veces más pesado que cualquier otro trabajo en mi país.
I was hoping to do well. I had the American dream of getting good conditions for labor, even though I did know that it was going to be 10 times harder than the conditions that I had back home.
Pero esto no me detuvo para viajar en búsqueda de este sueño.
This did not stop me in order to find and follow my dream.
Yo pasé por 4 filtros para llegar a trabajar al rancho en Alabama y en Florida. Pagué por mi visa de trabajo más de 23,000 pesos mexicanos.
I went through 4 filters or vetting processes in order to get the job at Florida and Alabama. I paid around 23,000 pesos to get my visa.
Durante el proceso de reclutamiento, una de las personas intermediarias o contratistas me pidió fotos. Esto a mí me dio miedo.
During the recruitment process, I was asked by somebody who was doing all the paperwork to send some pictures of myself, and that really scared me a little bit.
Porque aunque parecía que era un requisito normal, me sentí extraña teniendo que retratarme para ellos. Me pidieron fotos de cuerpo completo.
Even though it seemed like a regular request, it seems strange that they wanted to see my pictures and they asked for pictures that were showing my complete body.
En ese entonces, durante el proceso de reclutamiento, me dijeron que estas fotos eran para ver el físico y saber si era gorda o delgada y saber de qué color era mi piel.
Back then, during the process, they told me that the pictures were needed to be able to see my complexion, what was the color of my skin, if I was thin or fat.
Ahora sé que esto fue una acción absolutamente discriminatoria.
Now I know it was a completely discriminatory action.
Ya estando en los Estados Unidos, el trabajo era extremadamente pesado. Trabajamos desde antes de que saliera el sol hasta muy tarde, en ocasiones hasta después de las 10 de la noche, de lunes a domingo, con muy pocos descansos.
Being in the US, we would work right before the sun was up until maybe 10 p.m., even on the weekends from Monday to Sunday.
Recuerdo muy bien que el mismo día en que llegamos de México al hotel en donde nos hospedaron para el contrato, uno de los contratistas
I remember well when we arrived at the hotel, one of the contractors
nos dijo, bajen las maletas y suban al camión.
they told us, so get your luggage and get onto the truck.
De ahí nos llevaron a comenzar a trabajar sin tener oportunidad de descansar del viaje.
From then on, they took us directly to work without allowing us any time to rest after the trip.
Que habían sido más de 20 horas de camino.
And it had been over 20 hours of being on the trip, on the journey.
Sí, el trabajo fue como me lo habían descrito. Era un trabajo 10 veces más pesado.
Yes, and work was as it was described to me. It was 10 times harder than I would have expected.
Pero sin el salario prometido y un contrato que jamás se cumplió.
And without the salary that they had promised, nor a contract that never was enforced.
La mayoría de las veces nos pagaron por destajo, cuando el contrato decía que era por hora.
And the majority of time, they would pay us not by the hour, but by labor, and the contract said the opposite.
Sin siquiera recibir el salario mínimo de Alabama o de Florida.
Without being paid the minimum wage that was the official one at Alabama or Florida.
Los salarios llegaron a ser de menos de $100 por semana, de lunes a domingo.
The salaries ended up being less than $100 per week, working from Monday to Sunday.
Además, había que descontar la comida que nos vendía el mismo contratista, comida a la que no podía renunciar aunque quisiera.
And we also needed to discount from the payment the food that was being provided to us by the contractor. And I was not able to refuse it even though I wanted to.
Estábamos obligados a comprar solo la comida que esa persona nos vendía, una comida que no era digna, por la cual pagábamos más de $90 por semana.
We were obliged to purchase the food that was not a dignified meal from the contractor, and they would charge us about $90 per week for providing that food to us.
No tuvimos equipo de trabajo adecuado, tampoco tiempo de descanso.
We didn't have the appropriate equipment to carry out our work, and we didn't have free time either.
Viví una situación de abuso, acoso y discriminación constante.
I underwent an abusive and bullied situation on a constant basis.
Llena de amenazas, pues el contratista nos decía que tenía contactos en el departamento del trabajo y con la migra.
And it was full of threats because the contractor would tell us that they had connections with the Department of Labor and migration officers.
También nos amenazó diciendo reiteradamente que tenía nuestras direcciones en México y temíamos por nuestras familias.
They also threatened us by telling us that they had our addresses in Mexico and that otherwise our families will suffer.
Incluso nos amenazaron diciendo que nos podían desaparecer si decidíamos hablar sobre las malas condiciones laborales.
They even threatened us on disappearing us if we were to denounce of all the conditions that we were carrying out our labor.
Huir de esta situación es mucho más difícil de lo que pueden imaginar. Solo las personas que lo vivimos en carne propia conocemos todo el miedo y las razones.
To run away from this, it is much more difficult than you can imagine. We are the only ones who know what we had to endure.
Otro factor importante para el reclutamiento son las deudas que adquirimos en nuestro país para pagar una visa temporal.
Another important factor for recruitment are all the indebtedness that we had to go into to be able to pay for our visas in order to migrate for temporary work.
Esas deudas influyen muchísimo al momento de decidir denunciar o no, pues en lo personal tenía que pagar más de 23,000 pesos que me costó conseguir una visa de trabajo.
And that debt influences the situation when you're trying to decide whether to file a complaint or run away or not, because in my case, I owed 23,000 pesos to get my visa.
Me decidí a levantar la voz porque me harté de tanto abuso, porque a pesar de que fui a renunciar a mi contrato, aún sabiendo que tenía deudas en México,
I decided to raise my voice because I had it up. It was enough with all of the abuse that I was going to. And even though I thought of presenting that I was not going to work anymore, even though I had the debt in Mexico,
tendría que regresar como llegué, sin dinero, pues el contratista no me aceptó la renuncia.
I would have to come back as I arrived without any money because the contractor didn't want to receive my notice that I was leaving the work.
Él me respondió con un rotundo no, no puedes renunciar o irte.
He responded with a full stop, no, you cannot leave. You're not going to leave.
En ese momento supe que estaba secuestrada con ellos y que era real lo que el contratista nos dijo.
At that moment, I knew I was being held hostage or being sequestered with them, and that everything that they had told us, the contractor, everything that they had told us was true.
Cuando comenzamos el trabajo, dijo, desde este momento soy su patrón y su dueño, el dueño de sus vidas.
When we started working again, he said, from now on, I am your employer and your owner, the owner of your lives.
Al principio, mis denuncias no fueron escuchadas. Mi caso se quedó en número de folio.
At the beginning, my complaints were not heard. My case was only a file number.
Después, envié un correo electrónico al Departamento de Trabajo para pedir ayuda.
Afterwards, I sent an email to the Labor Department asking for help.
Pero me contestaron meses después.
And they answered months later.
Los únicos que me escucharon y atendieron mi caso fue servicios legales.
The only ones who heard me and took notice of my case were legal services.
Y luego a través de ellos llegué al Centro de los Derechos del Migrante en México.
And then through them is that I was able to reach the Center for the Rights of Migrants in Mexico.
Quise tomar acción a través de la queja bajo el TEMEC porque considero que es muy importante avanzar en la protección de los derechos laborales de las personas migrantes.
I wanted to take action through the TEMEC process because I think it is very important to respect and to hold up the rights of the migrants.
Y que realmente se atienda el problema de la discriminación hacia nosotras por las condiciones laborales tan desfavorables.
And to really address the issue of discrimination against us because of the poor labor conditions that we had to endure.
En donde a los hombres se les llegó a pagar más que a nosotras, aunque hiciéramos el mismo trabajo.
Where men received the higher payment compared to us women, even though we were doing the same work.
Hoy espero que el gobierno de Estados Unidos atienda de manera urgente y prioritaria las demandas de las y los trabajadores migrantes.
I hope that the US government pays attention with a priority approach about the complaints from all the migrant workers.
Ya que cuando todo está en equilibrio, ganamos todos.
Because when everything is balanced, everybody's going to win.
Mientras se cumplan a plenitud los derechos de las trabajadoras y los trabajadores migrantes, sin olvidar la condición humana donde todos merecemos una vida digna.
While the rights of workers are being respected and held up to, and this is a part of the human rights as well, that we have the right to have access to a dignified life.
Pues actualmente la realidad es que no se vigila a las personas responsables de quebrantar nuestros derechos, contratistas o empleadores.
Currently, the reality is that these people are not held accountable, the contractors or the employers.
El gobierno debe estar alerta y atender estas situaciones. Por eso considero que vale la pena seguir trabajando en cambiar las políticas para que algo bueno, fuerte y definitivo.
The government should pay attention to be able to see that the rights are being respected so that we can have something strong and definitive.
Asegure el pleno ejercicio de nuestros derechos laborales.
To assure the full exercise of our labor rights.
Y solo por mencionar algunos puntos importantes que escribí.
And just to mention some important points that I have written.
Debe haber acción afirmativa para que se contrate al mismo número de mujeres y de hombres.
There should be an affirmative action so that the same number of men who are being employed is going to be for the women as well.
Eliminar cuotas de reclutamiento. Asegurarse de que los reclutadores no cobren y que los empleadores reembolsen todos los gastos relevantes.
To eliminate the quotas that they have and to be able to see that the contractors are not being paid, and also the reimbursement needs to be better surveilled.
El Departamento del Trabajo debe colaborar con organizaciones como CDM.
The Department of Labor should cooperate with organizations such as CDM
para dar capacitaciones sobre derechos e información sobre a quién acudir para asesoría.
To train on matters of advisory and to whom to go to if there's any issue.
Antes de que se vayan las personas a Estados Unidos.
Before people leave to the United States.
y hacer entrevistas cuando regresan a sus comunidades.
and to conduct interviews when they return to their communities,
Para preguntarles sobre las condiciones de reclutamiento en sus lugares de trabajo.
to ask them about the recruitment conditions when they were carrying out their work.
El Departamento de Trabajo creo que debe proteger a las personas que participan en esas entrevistas de represalias y amenazas.
The Department of Labor, I think, should be present in trying to see that these people are being respected so that they are not going to retaliate against them in the future.
El consulado debe entrevistar a todas las personas que se van con visa de trabajo a Estados Unidos.
The consulate must also interview all the people who are coming to the United States with a labor visa.
Y si contestan que sí pagaron cuotas o enfrentaron otro abuso en el reclutamiento,
And if they say that they have paid installments or that they found other issues while in the recruitment processes,
aún así autorizarles las visas y no castigarlas.
even so, provide the visa and not punish them for doing so.
Los gobiernos de México y Estados Unidos deben tener un registro actualizado
The governments of Mexico and the United States must have an updated record
para la rendición de cuentas de reclutadores y empleadores que incluya su nombre completo y dirección.
to be able to exercise accountability from contractors and employers with their updated contact information.
Y no deben reclutar si hay quejas en su contra.
And they should not recruit if they find that they have any complaints against them.
Y si constantemente hay personal nuevo.
And if on a constant basis they see that they have a high turnover or new staff
En sus contratos.
in their contracts.
El Departamento de Trabajo debe hacer visitas frecuentes y sorpresas a los lugares de trabajo en Estados Unidos.
The Labor Department must carry out frequent and surprise visits to the labor centers
Y elegir a qué personas entrevistar en lugar de que el reclutador o patrón lo haga.
and they are the ones who should select who they are going to interview instead of allowing the contractor or the employer to select who is the person that will provide the interview.
Urge que el gobierno atienda las solicitudes de acción diferida o alivio migratorio.
It is urgent that the government looks at migratory relief or delayed actions
para evitar que las personas trabajadoras corran riesgo al levantar su voz.
to avoid that the workers are going to be at risk for raising their voices.
Hoy agradezco su atención y escucha sobre lo que viví.
I thank you for listening and paying attention to hearing out what I had to say about the things that I had to endure.
Con la plena confianza de que se actuará inmediatamente
With full confidence that you will act immediately,
tomando en consideración mis propuestas para el bienestar y beneficio de todos.
taking into consideration my proposals for the well-being of everyone.
A las personas migrantes, trabajadoras, les digo,
To the migrant people and the migrant workers, I say,
recuerden que el abusador dura hasta que los que callamos
remember that the abuser will go to the extent that
y permitimos, denunciamos los hechos.
those who remain silent allow for these things to continue to happen.
Aunque con miedo y necesidad, alcemos nuestras voces.
Even though we are in fear and we are in need, let's raise our voices
Para dejar de soportar la injusticia y los abusos constantes hacia nuestros derechos laborales.
to stop enduring injustice and overall abuse against our labor rights.
Gracias por su
Thank you.
atención.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Once again, I really appreciate Maritza sharing her story with us and the reality that a lot of the folks who decide to come forward have to share the trauma that they've experienced and that re-victimization that has to continue to exist even in this forum to make sure that folks understand what's going on. Recognizing that the reality for so many migrant workers is plagued with indentured servitude, with debt peonage, trafficking, with the issues of not being able to use your voice, not knowing where you can go. Just like William mentioned in the previous panel, right? One of the biggest issues is justice for workers, recognizing that it took months for Maritza to receive a response from the Department of Labor, and then out, is there enough enforcement at the government and federal level for these policies that exist? Right? And so when we start to look at it, we start to see a fractured ecosystem that exists for the migrant worker. And this is at the starting point that doesn't have any oversight many times because jurisdictions end at our border. So once again, we're starting to get a glimpse, and I'm really excited to jump into to hear more from Maritza, as well as let's go ahead and start off with Rachel, who's going to share a little bit about her organization. What are the practical issues that they're trying to tackle? How are they doing that? So please, Rachel, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Excuse me, and thank you, Maritza. I realize now that I can see Maritza in front of me, so I can face forward, but it's good to see you. So for 18 years now, CDM has been partnering directly with migrant workers to build worker power and advance justice. We have a team of legal advocates, one of whom is here with us today, Christina, educators, organizers, who work across the US and Mexico to really push for meaningful change in 3 key ways. So the first thing that we do is we organize with migrant communities. We inform workers of their rights and resources available to them, and we equip workers with the skills they need to become community advocates and movement leaders. Second, we advocate for fair labor migration policies, joining forces with unions, policymakers, academics, and organizations to actively campaign for workers' rights and challenge unfair practices. And finally, we represent workers in complaints to government agencies and in high-impact litigation, recovering earnings and damages and establishing important legal precedents to strengthen protections for workers. Ultimately, what we're working towards is a world where workers' rights are respected and policies reflect their voices and experiences. Because like Maritza said, we at CDM all believe that workers deserve or have a right to dignity, safety, equal treatment, and a fair wage. We also believe that workers' voices and experiences need to be at the center of any system, policy, or process that impacts them. And so at CDM, we're guided by our 100-plus member Comité de Defensa de Migrante, or Migrant Defense Committee. This group of migrant leaders helps shape our strategy as an organization and helps define our priorities. Together with workers like Maritza, workers in our Migrant Defense Committee, and our allies in Migration That Works, we envision an alternative model to labor migration, a model that shifts controls to workers, elevates labor standards, and ensures a pathway to citizenship for those who want it. There's a lot that needs to be done, but a lot that can be done, and when it comes to working and protecting workers' rights throughout the recruitment process. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it throughout the next 2 days.
That's right. No, thank you so much, Rachel. And just as Rachel mentioned, right, there's just a lot of work that needs to be done. And so it takes organizations, advocacy organizations, recruitment organizations, federal organizations to come together. And how do we bridge that? How do we create where we're communicating with one another beyond our borders to really create that oversight? But in speaking to that and international representation, I'm excited to have Noor with us here from the International Labor Organization that can share some points as well.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much for having us on this in this forum, for the invitation. Very pleased to share with Rachel. Maritza, muchas gracias por compartir tu historia con nosotros. To be with you and to learn a bit more about as well what's going on in this complex world of migration and fair recruitment. So we are, just briefly maybe, the International Labour Organization, which you may all well know or maybe not so well. We are a UN agency. We are a bit different than other UN agencies because we are a tripartite agency, which means that we work with workers' organizations, employers' organizations, and with governments, always trying to reach between these three constituents, as we call them, consensus on how to protect labor rights for workers and for migrant workers included in this whole category of workers. So we work for all workers, including migrant workers. We're a normative institution, as you may know, a normative agency. So we set labor standards, and that's why we're very pleased that everyone basically who's been talking today, or many of you have mentioned labor rights really as the key. And Maritza has been saying it several times as well. She's mentioned many labor rights that have been violated, like in this whole journey that she's gone through. And we share with Rachel and everyone else who has talked that there's progress, but there's challenges as well ahead still. So I don't know if you want me to go into that, Joe, or keep it there and a bit talk. Yeah, just go a bit into that because I think it's really difficult to talk after someone like Maritza because she's been basically telling the story and mentioning everything that I think William, Heaven, other speakers have been mentioning already. Because Maritza's been talking about this complexity in terms of, you were mentioning it, Joe, of all these different actors that have a role, right? And when we talk about fair recruitment, we've been talking about the state that needs to be talking about pre-departure, for example, information, that information has to be accessible, that it has to be in a language that we all understand, that it has to be transparent, that this goes for contracts as well, and that has not been happening in this case. We're talking about oversight, you were saying inspection, for example, not just in the countries of origin, but also in the countries of destination. We've talked about the employment agency, the recruiters, which every country has different rules and procedures and laws about how they should operate. A recent study that we did that I would like to mention in 4 countries, in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico, that we just launched a few weeks ago, on the gaps and progress on the application of the fair recruitment, the ILO fair recruitment principles, which are 13 principles on how to respect and to protect labor rights for national workers. But today we're talking specifically about migrant workers, so I'll focus on that. And I also found that the most regulations for recruiters are outdated. So that it's not only a problem to know like what's a recruiter that I can rely on, where is it registered? Maritza was talking about registries and all that kind of thing. So that's another actor where there's a lot of complexity and where we need to update regulations, and ILO, we're working hard on that, for example, in countries like Honduras and Mexico. Then there's the employers, who have a role as well, and who are very interested, obviously, in getting workers to fill those needs of the labor markets that were already mentioned by everyone, but often also don't have the knowledge or the interest maybe, or have access to information about what fair recruitment is all about. What can I charge? What are recruitment fees? What are costs? Or maybe they do know and they don't apply it. And then obviously the fourth important, and that's why we're talking about in this particular segment, is the workers themselves, right? Who can be, who need a voice, you were saying that, who need to, and Maritza's getting this voice today, and I hope many more get that, and through centers like Rachel's as well. But who have challenges, obviously, as well, again, about information, access to justice, very mentioned by William as well, which is for the ILO very important, grievance mechanisms to know where to go when your rights are violated. We also find that states, going back to this first important actor in this whole equation, often don't have that information, so they can't really prepare workers about, you were mentioning a minimum salary in a particular state in the United States, so they don't have access to that information, so they can't inform the worker correctly before they leave and go and participate in these kind of schemes. To know what's going on. I heard about occupational safety and health as well, a fundamental labor right, which was also is part and a very important part of this situation. So I'm hearing all these things that we found and that we all know, but that we've sort of tried to systematize in one particular study that we can share with you and that has to do with this coordination between all these actors, as you were saying, that have a role, and where there's progress, but there's still a lot to improve. And maybe to finalize my intervention here, Joe, and go to the next question. We also think as ILO that it's very important to understand that temporary labor migration is in itself a very complex concept. Again, I invite you to read another document that came out last year discussed by these three constituents about the different types of schemes, programs, unilateral, bilateral, regional, seasonal, temporary, circular. There's really no consensus about what does temporary labor migration mean, and I think that in itself, the complexity of understanding what it is very well reflected in everything that we're discussing today about the complexity of each phase of the recruitment and phase and the risks and opportunities as well that are involved.
Thank you, Noor. Yeah, and as you all heard, right, once again, the session's focused on the starting point. And how can anyone get started when you're starting with a disadvantage? When you don't know your rights, you don't know where you're going, you don't have access to a network of folks that can support you, and ultimately it takes an extreme amount of courage that Maritza's shown to be able to denounce this. And to remain focused on denouncing your issues, knowing that it's going to be a long journey ahead, one that continues even today. And so that brings me into our second question, which is when we start to focus on policies. I mean, obviously we know policies exist. There's a lack of enforcement on these policies, whether it be the country of destination or the country of origin. And so my question to our panelists is, do we need to continue to focus on policies? Is that the way forward here? Or how do we envision, or how do we ensure compliance, bringing migrant workers to the focus and ensuring that they can lead us to really be able to denounce the issues such that Maritza has shared today?
Well, thanks for the question, Joe. And I just want to return to the last question just for a second in terms of practical solutions, and especially because of something that William and Neil were talking about with respect to technology. You know, for CDM, we do a lot of our pre-departure Know Your Rights education in person, in communities of origin, with our Migrant Defense Committee and with other migrant worker leaders. But what we found is that there are patterns and bad actors that move geographies. And tech tools, when done right, when co-designed with workers, can have huge impact. And so we're really proud of the work we've done innovating with technology with contratados.org, which essentially allows workers to share information across geographies, avoid fraud, take action, learn about their rights. And Contratados reaches more than 2,000 unique users every day who are accessing information about their rights and what they can do to defend them. And so I think it's also really important, especially in a world where we don't have transparency, we don't have the registry, our governments aren't regulating the recruitment process in the way that they need to be. And so workers are coming together and pulling their information and resources and using tech tools to be able to protect themselves throughout their experience and make more informed decisions about migration and work. And so Contratados is one, El Portal Migrante, and then we have another tool that I think is really important, which is Sol, which helps answer workers' questions in real time. And so we don't have the issues sort of that, Maritza was talking about the long delays, organizations getting back to them. And, the guest worker programs in the United States have grown tremendously. When I started CDM, there were 50,000 H-2A workers. This year, more than 500,000, right? So 10 times the size. And we predict they're going to grow significantly larger in the next few years. And so we need to figure out how we're providing a base of support for workers throughout their experience. And while there's no substitute to in-person trainings and workshops and legal support, tech tools can help us expand our reach and have done that. So sorry to go back to that, but
I think No, that's a great point, Rachel, and I think it is important just for folks to know the H-2A visa, right, that Maritza's talking about when originally has been growing from 14 to 24% year after year. And Maritza also has a point to share here. Maritza, please.
Bueno, en relación a lo que hablan de tecnología, quiero
Well, with
comentar
regards to what you're saying about technology, I would like to comment.
Pienso que la tecnología puede ayudar en parte, pero por sí sola no resuelve todo.
I think technology can help in part, but in itself is not going to resolve everything.
Para que ese sueño americano no se convierta en una pesadilla, como en mi caso. Y en
So
muchos.
that American dream does not become a nightmare, such as it was my case and the case of many others.
Pienso que se puede aprovechar WhatsApp inmediatamente.
I think we can take advantage of WhatsApp immediately,
Para que todas las personas que tenemos un celular a nuestro alcance
so that all of us who have a cell phone within reach
hacer llegar nuestras quejas al gobierno desde esta aplicación.
can denounce and file our complaints to the government by the use of this application.
Veo el poder de la tecnología acercando información y pienso que el Departamento de Trabajo
I see the power of technology in closing in and making communication much more rapid. And I think that the Department of Labor
debe tener un sitio web seguro y público sobre las ofertas de trabajo actualizadas.
should have an updated, open public opportunities of work on their website,
Con el nombre de empleadores y contratistas en donde podamos enviar solicitudes de empleo.
with the name of the employers, recruiters, and contractors, so that we can send our information to be able to apply to that job.
Que sean con contestación y autorización para que como trabajadoras y trabajadores
That are authorized and with an answering approach, so that we as workers
podamos elegir e incluso cambiar de empleo si el contrato no se cumple o no satisface nuestras necesidades e intereses laborales.
can be able to select the one that we would like, and also to have the opportunity of changing jobs if they are not fulfilling our needs and the rights that we need to be respecting.
Asimismo, contar con algunas aplicaciones que permitan a las personas trabajadoras
Likewise, to have certain apps that allow for worker people
evaluar a contratistas y empleadores,
to do an assessment of contractors and employers
de manera segura sobre las condiciones de reclutamiento y de trabajo,
in a safe manner on the conditions of recruitment and labor.
sería de manera segura y protegida también.
It
Para
would be
evitar-
in a safe and protected manner for us, yes.
Todo ello administrado por el gobierno para asegurar la rendición de cuentas de los empleadores y contratistas.
All of that managed by the government to assure accountability from the recruiters and employers.
Además de saber cuánto nos pagan, pues no entendemos el inglés hablado ni escrito, menos las abreviaturas.
Besides knowing what we're going to be paid, we do not understand spoken or written English, and we don't understand abbreviations or acronyms.
Que sea por lo menos en español, para que esas abreviaturas que vienen en los pagos las entendamos.
The information should be in Spanish, at least the one that comes on the paying slip, so that we can understand all of the abbreviations that it has.
Pues lo único que llegamos a entender cuando cobrábamos el cheque era que nos cobraban $10.
Because the only thing that we were able to understand every time that we were going to collect our check is that that we were being charged $10.
por ir a intercambiarlos.
We were being charged $10 to be able to collect our check.
Aparte de lo que pagamos, obviamente, porque así es, el costo por enviar dinero a México o a nuestro país.
Apart from the payment that, of course, it is the case, and it is how it has to be, the payment that we have to make to send money to our countries of origin or to our families.
Pues como pueden escuchar,
As you are able to hear,
es un negocio redondo para los contratistas el hecho de que nos cobren por el reclutamiento.
as you're able to hear, it is big business for the recruiters because they're charging us for the recruiting process,
Y en muchas ocasiones es fraude.
and oftentimes this is fraud.
Aparte de las cuotas de reclutamiento, pasar por el acoso, pagar también todavía para que se intercambie el cheque, pagar por una comida que no es digna.
Apart from the recruitment fee, the abuse, the bullying, and to pay for a food that we do not like and that is that dignified.
Y en muchas ocasiones hasta por los dormitorios, que son en muy malas condiciones, porque muchas veces es dormir hasta en el piso.
And to be able to collect our checks, and also oftentimes on the lodging conditions that sometimes we have to sleep on the floor.
Después de un día de trabajo, de antes de las 6 de la mañana, a veces hasta las 10:30 de la noche.
After a long day of work from before 6 a.m. up until maybe 10:30 at night.
Pues trabajar en el campo es duro,
To work the field is hard,
pero aún así estamos dispuestos a hacer el trabajo con tal de tener una vida de mejor calidad.
but even so, we are willing to do the work in order to have opportunities for a better life, a quality life.
Gracias, espero les sirvan mis comentarios.
Thank you, and I hope that my comments are of use to you.
No, thank you, Maritza. As you can hear, right, I mean, these are just the conditions of forced labor, and how does one get out of that? And recognizing that there's still a monetary exchange that you then send to your families, costing you even more, right, that folks can't afford to lose. And it's that vulnerability that continues to be used and abused against workers, right? And a reason why many workers don't say anything, right? Knowing that that could even be a challenge for Maritza, saying you're putting my job in jeopardy by saying something. So the pressure is not only from the employer, from these abuses, but the folks that you're also there with. So it's very complicated, as you all know. I know we don't have much time, but I do want to make sure Noor has some moments to share a little bit.
Yeah, I thought your question about do we need to continue strengthening policies, I was like so brainstorming about this with my colleague Francesco is here as well from the ILO, and we're thinking, yeah, what would the plan B be really, you know? We firmly think that policies need to be strengthened. Also thinking that having no policy would be everyone acting on its own, right? A policy obliges us to develop a coordinated and implement, where that's where the challenge is many times, a coordinated approach between all these actors, everyone here in the room, everyone that we just mentioned. And it also, well, obviously related and ideally related to the international labor standards that we just, a normative framework that we just mentioned as well. And it's also important, we think, that that's one of the only ways that migrant workers like Maritza can actually claim their rights and demand state recruiters and everyone involved in these policies that they're not complying with what they promised to do or are obliged to do. So we do firmly think, answering your question, yes, that policies need to be strengthened tripartitely with employers, with workers, with the state and other actors, civil society obviously as well. And the voice of the migrant should obviously be involved there. And there may be two examples, and I'll leave to Rachel because I know we're short of time. We are supporting, and I want to mention this because I think it's important, it has come up various times, the importance of applications of technology, but also this, I think it was William who said this face-to-face, and you were saying it, Rachel, as well, this face-to-face, in-person advice and orientation that migrants can receive. We have many of the migrant workers resource centers in Asia. We have one now in Latin America as well, in Tijuana. It's run by a trade union, and we notice as well, and that's what migrant workers say when they go there and receive their services, orientation or legal advice or whatever they come from, they're specialized in labor issues, is that it's very comforting and it generates trust to be talking to another worker, to a trade union, in your language, with your information and all that. Maritza saying no, I think, but for us, the workers we've talked to have received the service that has been helpful. And also, obviously, all the technology that you know best, Maritza, you already mentioned, it cannot be the only solution, obviously. And the other practical solution I wanted to mention is with you, Cierto, Joe, about with Cierto, is the work in indigenous communities and how to make sure that we know there's an impact on communities. It's already mentioned as well, these temporary labor schemes, but specifically for indigenous people who have their own culture, their own cosmovision, their collective approach, which is obviously often negatively influenced by recruiting in the manner that's been done traditionally or now. So that's something that we're very happy with as well, to sort of the nuance was mentioned by various speakers as well, to see specific populations and their specific needs.
Great. No, thank you, Noor.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're doing great. I know it's a lot of challenges, very complex, right?
Yeah.
As we hear from Maritza, we hear from the organizations, the challenges remain, right? As someone who's tried to create an ethical, responsible recruitment model and been in the industry for over 15 years, it continues to be a challenge. It is not the norm. Workers are not educated on their rights. And how do we continue to shift that paradigm and be able to move that, knowing that we have to engage everyone within the supply chain, from worker advocacy organizations to federal governments to private business. Everyone has a role to play. How do we coalesce that together to really see change? And I'll just go ahead and just give one more minute for final comment. Oh, wait, we have a question?
No question. There's only a minute left in our session, and we have to come to a hard stop. But I just want to say that we receive a lot of comments. Basically, people are thanking Maritza for your courage and for sharing your story with us. So thank you very much for that. And thank you, Joe, for your note about how each storytelling is a form of re-victimization. There's a cost to Maritza for always doing that. And it's not just a story to listen to, but it serves a greater purpose of bringing in a more fair version of recruitment. There have been a lot of questions on what does a worker-centric solution looks like, and I think we can address that better in the next channel. So right now, just thank you so much.
No, well, thank you, everyone. I apologize we don't have more time, and please feel free to reach out to my colleagues, and excited to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.